Thanksgiving offering can be given today or anytime in the month of October, and money that comes in designated for that, we will funnel that to International Justice Mission to help them with their ministry. This is one of their ministries. They have others, but this is the one that we're focusing on at this time. Have you ever been between a rock and a hard place? I was an adult before I heard that expression. It's interesting. It's an English expression. To be between a rock and a hard place. It means to be in a very difficult place. It's something like this. This is my hard place. And that was up my back. But there's a rock coming at me. And I'm between a rock and a hard place. Maybe it's the fact that I've run out of money and I still have bills to pay. So what's in my back is the money I've run out of, but the bills are pressing in on me. That's me between a rock and a hard place. Or my student coming up to exams, and that's what's behind my back. But what's pressing on me is that if I don't get good marks in these exams, I'm not going to get the funding that I need to continue, or they won't keep me in my particular program, and I really want to be there. Or I've offended someone, and that's behind my back, but I really want to be reconciled to that person, but they don't want to forgive me. Well, that's to be between a rock and a hard place. When you're there, what are you thinking? Help. Probably. Help. You're between a rock and a hard place, but you know, there's something behind that help. There's a question. Who can help me when I'm between a rock and a hard place? Who can help me when I'm between a rock and a hard place? Well, there's a story in the Bible, a story about a group of people who are between a rock and a hard place. And they're asking that question. It's in the background of the passage. Who can help me when I'm between a rock and a hard place? Well, to give you a bit of background, it's the people of Israel. They spent 400 years in slavery. 400 years. That means my grandparents, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, and on have been slaves for all of that time. But now something wonderful has happened. God, using Moses as his leader, has led these people out of Egypt. They've left slavery. They've left Egypt. And now they are on their way to the promised land. It's promised land because they've been promised it. And life is good. And our story picks up in Exodus 14, verse 1. And we read, Then the Lord said to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, God is with these people. They're in a good place. Life is good. God is speaking to them. They're responding to God. They're obeying God. Because God says to Moses, well, tell the people to go over here by the sea and set up camp right there. And so they obey. They go over right by the sea and they set up camp. Well, life is good. Have you had those periods of time in your life where life is really good? Or maybe you're in that period of time right now. That's great. And this is Thanksgiving Sunday. We give God thanks for those times in our lives. And if that's you right now, then we give thanks. But we all know that's not where you live all of life. From time to time, life is good. But there are many other times when life doesn't seem to be good. So the people are set up right by the sea. That's where God told them to go. They've obeyed God. And life is good. But back in Egypt, in the palace, Pharaoh's starting to rethink this whole thing. God is hardening his heart. Pharaoh is changing his mind. Pharaoh's thinking, hold it. Oh, those slaves are gone now. If we don't have them around to do our work, then the Egyptians are going to have to do the work. We need those slaves back. We have pyramids to build. We have projects to do. And so Pharaoh's changing his mind. And he's thinking, we're going to get them. And so he calls out all of his best chariots, all of his horsemen, and all of his army. And he starts chasing after the people of Israel. And he catches up with them. And he sees a strategic opportunity. because they're camped right beside the sea. And so he hems them in with his army. Now the people see this coming. And the people are thinking, this is not good. You see, they're between a rock and a hard place. Literally between Pharaoh and his army and between the sea. But they're still thinking, this is not good. They're between a rock and a hard place. And so they start to think about this. And they have a response. Now, what's your response when you're between a rock and a hard place? It might not be that particular scenario, but there are different scenarios. What's your response? What is your emotional response when you get into that difficult position, when you're between a rock and a hard place? Well, these people experience fear. The Bible says great fear. And we can understand that. Pharaoh isn't going to come and say, you know, guys, I'm sorry that we weren't getting along. Why don't you come on back to Egypt and be my slaves? Pharaoh is going to capture them again. He's going to punish them. He's going to kill many of them as punishment. And the rest he's going to take back. And their lives will be miserable till the day they die. If he captures them again. So they naturally have this kind of fear. But what's your reaction? Let's say you've been following God one step at a time. Have you had that experience? You're just following God. You're doing what he says. And then you end up in a position where you're between a rock and a hard place. All you're doing is following God. But now it's become impossible. We experience that a lot in our journey in missions, where we really sense God was calling us to take these different steps, which actually did end us up in Africa. But there were many times along the way when we were crushed in by a financial burden for lack of support. When you get to that place, what is your response? Well, it might be fear because of what might happen. But I think for many people, there's something else going on. There's anger. God, you led me here. God, you're the one that got us here. Now what's going on? And so that anger starts to come along with the fear. Are you with me? Have you ever experienced that? You thought you were doing something that God wanted you to do. And now you end up like this, between a rock and a hard place, and they're pressing you in. Well, the people were afraid, but they had another response. The response, first response, was to cry out to the Lord. Hey, that's a really good one. Their first response was to call out to God. So even if you're feeling that fear, even if you're feeling that anger, calling out to God is the right thing to do. Telling God what's on your heart. That's a good thing to do, even when you're angry at God. Because then you're talking to God. Well, they did something else as well. They criticized Moses, their leader. They said, Moses, aren't there enough graves in Egypt for us to be buried in? You had to bring us out here to be buried? Now think about that just for a minute. They are preferring to die as slaves in Egypt than to die as free people out here in the wilderness. They're still thinking like slaves. But that's what they say to Moses. They're between a rock and a hard place. Sometimes in life, that's where you get to. And so they call out to God. And God responds to them. And he says, Moses, hold up your staff. Now, if you're one of those people, you're thinking, okay, God, now what we really want you to do is just obliterate the Egyptian army. All right? We want you to be our big brother and just take care of everything. Right now. When trouble comes into our lives, isn't that our kind of response? God, just get it out of here. Let's get rid of it. Moses holds up his staff. Like, God, is that the best you can do? This guy holding up his staff. But that's when God responds to them. And actually God does give an intervention of sorts, because there's this cloud that they're following. And it's a huge cloud. I mean, I don't know what size it would be, but the cloud moves around behind them. And the cloud, maybe it's getting dark, but the cloud causes real deep darkness. And the Egyptians can't see anything. So I guess they settle down for the night and wait for the morning to come. So that gives him a little bit of time. And Moses is told to hold up his staff. And then what? While the whole night goes by. And if you were in the tent that night, what you would hear would be a really strong wind. Not a gentle breeze, but a really strong wind. When we were in Florida a couple of years ago, we went to Cape Canaveral National Park. And it's on the east side of the peninsula. And the wind is so strong. And it's so continuous. It's not just a strong wind. It's strong all the time, just blowing and blowing. Well, this was a new experience for us. We're in Florida, so what do? You go to the beach with a beach umbrella, right? So I set up the beach umbrella. Well, the next thing you know, I'm chasing the beach umbrella down this beach. Susan is standing there laughing, taking pictures. So when I think of this wind, that's the kind of wind that I think of. That's blowing all night, and if you're in the tent, then you hear the flaps of the tent snap, 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 snap. And you're afraid, because the Egyptians are there, the sea is there, and this wind, I don't know what's happening, but fear is a really natural response to that. You get up in the morning, and something amazing has happened. Like God really has intervened. The Egyptians are still there. There's the sea, but the sea, it's like parted. There's a way through the sea. And then there's on this side, there's a tall bank of water, and on this side, there's a tall bank of water. God has done something. Who can help us when we're between a rock and a hard place? Well, you know the answer is God can help us. That's the answer. But that's not the end. You see, these people were slaves. They didn't know how to swim. They didn't get swimming lessons when they were kids. So here's the sea that's holding them back. And they're afraid of the sea. Well, now the sea is parted. And imagine you're in the front line, right there. The sea is parted. You're in the front line. And you look over this way and you see water. And you look over this way and you see water. Now, we often see, well, if you see pictures, it usually shows like a narrow little path, like maybe like what we have here, and then water on this side and that side. But think about it. There's about 2 million people that need to cross this sea fast, because the Egyptians are right there. Plus the herds and flocks. So it's probably quite wide, like a super highway. You know, like in Toronto, where there's 16 lanes going either way, like big, so that people can get across. But you're there, and you're right at the front. And you look at the water there, and you look at the water there, and you think, well, what if I just get about here, and all that water starts coming back in again? I can't swim. And so you're standing right there on the line. And are you going to step over it, or you're not going to step over it? See, God's provided a way. But to step forward requires trust in God. Because if you get out there in the middle and the water comes back, then you're finished. You need to trust God. You see, it is true. You know that's the answer. Who's going to help you when you're between a rock and a hard place? You know the answer is God will make a way. Right? You know that's the answer. But you stand right here on the shore, and He's made a way. Or whatever your situation is in life, He's made a way. And you're saying, God, I don't like your way. I don't like this at all. You're financially really down under. You got lots of bills. You go to see your financial person at the bank, and they say, what you need to do is sell your house, pay off your bills, move to a much cheaper area, and probably move into an apartment. And you might be able to start again. God, I don't like your way. I like my neighbors. I like my neighborhood. It's a little pricey, but I like being there. God says, this is the way. God, I don't like your way. Or we say, God, I don't like your way. You're telling me I need to live with the pain of this relationship? I just wanted everything taken care of. Thank you. You said you'll be with me as I walk through this difficult time, but I don't like your way, God. I was expecting something else, God. And so there we are. There's the edge of the sea right there. God has made a way. Will we trust Him? See, that's really the big question. Will we trust him to walk his way, knowing he walks with us? Well, between a rock and a hard place. That's where the people found themselves. Yes, they trusted God. They walked through that way. And as they were just going up the other side, the Egyptians realized the Israelites are escaping. We've got to go get them now. And so the army mobilizes, and I don't know what they're thinking, but they rush into this way. The Bible says they crossed on dry land. So the Egyptians just rush right into that area, and they get part way over, and their chariots stop working properly. I don't know. The axle seized up. It just says they stopped working. And so then they get really confused about what's going on. And the Israelites are now in a front row seat to watch what God is going to do. And the army, the Egyptian army, is like, it's like a melee, you know, like it's like a brawl. And nobody knows what they're doing. Chariots are turning this way and that way, and they're all, that's what the text says, they're all right down there in the bottom of the sea. And God says to Moses, Moses, lift up again. Your rod, lift it up. And Moses does that, and that's the end of the Egyptians. That water comes tumbling back in. But the Israelites were probably afraid what happened. It actually happened, and it took care of all the Egyptians. So it's a story that has a happy ending. Not all stories do. You're between a rock and a hard place. Maybe your story's not done yet. Maybe you're still there between a rock and a hard place. But God calls us to trust him. God says, I will make a way, but it's God's way. And there's one other thing that comes up in this story again and again and again. God says, I will make a way for my glory. If you read the story in chapter 14, God says, for my glory. I will have glory over the Egyptians. That's why he's doing what he's doing. He's not just trying to make our life comfortable. God is more interested in our holiness than he is in our happiness. It's for his glory. And what he's doing in our lives, even when life is really difficult, he's doing it for his glory. And we really need that kind of perspective. Well, the story ends. And how do we respond to a story like that? This is how Moses responds. Chapter 15 is a song that Moses wrote for the people. And they probably sang it right away. Chapter 14 might have been written later when Moses was actually writing what we call a Pentateuch. But it seems that this song was written right away. The people sang it. This story is not for the people at that time. Do you get that? This story is written later about what happened to those people at that time. This story was written for those who would read it later, who needed it later. It was written for you and it was written for me. Well, this is what Moses writes. Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. And so the story ends with worship and with praise. What's an appropriate response to a story like this? Well, worship and praise is an appropriate response. And we've already spent some time worshiping God, and we'll come back to that. What's also appropriate is giving thanks. Thanksgiving Sunday, but giving thanks in response to what God has done in our lives. Now, we were given out little leaves as you came in. Now, maybe someone or a few people got missed. Jacques, do you have any more? Can we give them all out? Because if you don't have a leaf, I'd like you to take one, and I'll give you just a couple minutes to write something on that leaf. The leaf says, I am thankful for. Okay? I am thankful for. Now, you can write anything in there, but you might think of a time that God really made a way for you when there seemed to be no other way. He made a way, and you might want to put just a couple words in there. You understand them, God understands them, maybe nobody else does. That's okay. I am thankful for. I'd like you to just fill these out. This is an appropriate response to God's word, to give thanks to Him. Now, you might be in a difficult place right now. You're between a rock and a hard place. It's good to remember what He has done in the past. And it's also good because sometimes we get so caught up in ourselves that we need to get a different perspective. And worship does that for us. And giving thanks does that for us. It helps us get out of ourselves and get a different perspective. So this is our response to this message this morning. Now, just write that on, and in a couple minutes I'm going to invite you to come to the front and to attach your leaf to this tree. This will be our Thanksgiving tree. There's a few leaves on it. This will be our Thanksgiving tree. So you just attach it. There's a little wire there. Just attach it somewhere on the tree. These are the leaves, and so the tree will grow leaves as we attach them. Now you might notice we didn't take up an offering yet today. As a response of thanksgiving, I invite you, if you have an offering, to put the offering in the plate, which is right here beside the tree. If you don't have an offering, that's okay. But if you do, then you can give your offering. Come forward and give your offering to God as an expression of thanksgiving for all that He's given to us. And if you have that special Thanksgiving offering in an envelope or an envelope with it written on, you can put that in here as well. There are certainly some children who are between a rock and a hard place. And our offering toward International Justice Mission and the cyber sex trap that they're in, for some of them is going to provide a way for them to get out of that. So I'm just going to give you a couple moments and you can fill those up. Okay, if you filled that out, you can bring it up and just put it on the tree, and then go back to your seat. If you don't have a pen, we have pens at the back.